Welcome to Art with Janine. Painting corn in a field with palette knife. I've mixed a base color of, I guess, the color that I felt was the most predominant, and I am applying that to the background first. And this doesn't have to be too textured or detailed. It can just be a patch in the area that the corn will be. And it can be a guide too for where the corn's going. I have scraped up some paint on the bottom of the palette knife, a little bit got on the top, and I'm just gently spreading it across the canvas. Imagine using a butter knife and spreading a little butter on your bread, but making it a little thick. It's kind of how it works. I'm just scraping the paint off of the horse area so that I still have that area defined. Notice how the paint is not just one color. I mixed a little black in with the green to create a darker shade so that, well, that is kind of what I saw in the background. But it doesn't matter that it's not completely mixed in because it just adds a little more texture to the painting. There we go. Now the corn kind of breaks off and there's a path between two sections of corn. So I'm just sticking this patch over on the one side and sort of indicating that this corn is getting smaller into the distance where it meets the other patch of corn. Need to bring this down a little more, so I'm just adding a little more on the behind the horse. I'm pretty much blocking out the white canvas with this layer of color. Now I'm going to the lighter green. I had mixed two tones of green ahead of time. And looking at the photograph, I'm just basically following the color pattern that I see there, but I'm not worrying too much about it looking like corn right now. It's more about the areas of color that will be behind the detail. And I'm again using the same method of spreading, perhaps just a little differently by going a little up and down with the side of the palette knife. So the right side of the palette knife is touching the canvas as I spread. The left side is slightly elevated. This allows me not to catch the paint with the side of the palette knife. Now you can see that I've tipped further to the right with the palette knife, trying to sort of scratch the darker color up into the lighter green to add some points. Just a little detail in the background. It's not going to be too important because I'm going to be adding more layers to this with detail. But every little bit of texture that I can add into the background is going to add to the busyness of the corn. And here I'm mixing a darker tone. And I'm using the top of the palette knife to kind of grab paint and stir into the other. This is a warmer tone, and this just goes at the very top, and you'll notice that it's only coming off of the top of the palette knife. The whole palette knife is touching the canvas, but I only put the paint on the top of the palette knife so that this wasn't going down into the other part. If I want it to go down into the other part, I can just move my palette knife down and bring it in. You notice that I'm using the right side of the palette knife again, and quite sharply, to now get some points at the top for the grasses and or top parts of the corn. Now I've used a light tone, and now do you see I'm using the left side of my palette knife. I'm doing this in high speed because this took quite a long time. I'm slowing down now just to show you a little bit carefully. Using the left side of the palette knife, I am just scraping my finger up to make sure the bottom is clean, because I just want to place a little bit on the top of those grasses and corn. So again, I want shorter pieces now for the smaller area, so I've wiped up the palette knife a little bit to get shorter lines. And I'm dabbing and scraping across a tiny bit as I go, just to give the sort of that effect of the top, I guess seed areas of the top of the grasses. I'm tilting the palette knife diagonally this way and that way to get a bit of movement so that it's not all in one direction. Just having a cup of tea and watching this video. I have to record it with a lot of like household noise, and then later on come back and say my thoughts. These are kind of like the thoughts I'm having as I'm creating it, but now I get to say them. As you can see, I'm trying to give that little bit of grassy effect on the top, a little bit of motion as the breeze blows the corn to the right. I'm using the very corner of the palette knife to scrape out little bits of the color. See, just like that, and then up and out, just to get a bit of motion in there. You have to take a bit of risk. I like to take a bit of risk with the color. If you overdo it a little, you can do what I just did and add a little white in there to fill in anything that looks a little too solid there. I'm just gently placing more of that warm color at the top, and then I will go probably back to the grasses at the bottom. Let's see how this video plays out. We're still in the very background, so it's a simpler detail right now. I just keep going until it just feels right to me, and of course I'm looking at the photograph and just getting a rough idea of where there are higher peaks in the background, and I'm not trying to get it completely accurate to the photo, but you know, general shape of things would be great. As you can see, it is a slow process, and just thinking through it carefully as I go. Trying different angles with the palette knife to see what will give the effect I'm looking for. If a stroke comes out a little square on the top, I just push upwards to get a point, because I'm really hoping to have those points at the top of the grasses there. And still sort of dragging the corner to the right in order to get a bit of movement, like the wind is blowing them to the right. You can see I'm not pressing hard with the palette knife. It's very gentle touching the canvas with it. Very lightly. Look how loosely I'm holding the palette knife. As you can see now, I've moved back to the light green, and I'm doing a little blending, bringing the light green up into the warmer color at the top. A little high speed. Bringing the green down a little. Using a lot of the strokes that were just described, putting the darker green down the bottom, adding in some black shadows, and a little bit of white. So I'm just sort of splashing bits of color and light and dark that I see in there. And now I'm going to try and define a little bit using this different palette knife that has a short edge and a long edge. So I'm pretty much just dipping the top of this palette knife into the paint and tapping the colour on, and using diagonal movements and downward movements, and allowing the palette knife to just sort of create these lines that could give the effect of leaves and the grassy effect in the top. And there you go, sort of diagonal lines and more black shadow, a little touch of white here and there. A little use of a sponge to soften the top of the corn, and I can do a lesson on sponge later. I hope you've enjoyed this little lesson on palette knife, and if you'd like to see more videos and short tips and lessons, check out Art with Janine YouTube channel.